gentlemen, please rise as the Feldheim family enters the chapter.
Go ahead. Yeah. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we're going to begin the funeral services of Rabbi Edward H. Feldheim. We request that everyone take a moment to be sure that your cell phones have been turned off, and we welcome those of you who are joining us online. Rabbi Lizzie Heidemann from Mishkan will be officiating.
לכל זמן ועת וכל חפץ תחת השמיים, עת ללדת ועת למות, עת לטעת ועת לעקור נטוע, עת להרוג ועת לרפוא. A season is set for everything, says Ecclesiastes. A time for every experience under heaven, a time for planting and a time for reaping, a time for keeping and a time for letting things go, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for embracing and a time for refraining from embrace, a time for laughing and a time for weeping, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. So a moment ago, the Feldheim family, Rabbi Ed's wife, Linda, his children, Rachel and Debbie and Benji, and their spouses, Stuart and Debbie and Michael, and Ed's caregiver, Teek, and grandkids, Alex and Josh and Brandon and Madeline and Isabel. We began by tearing a ribbon and placing it on the left side of your chest, right over your heart. And it's an external symbol of the internal rending that one feels when one has lost a family member as close and as dear as Ed was to everyone in the Feldheim family. And it's different when the husband or father or grandfather or uncle or friend who died is also a beloved community rabbi. For such people, the Talmud says, everyone is their relative, and everyone rends their garment if this scholar or teacher or rabbi touched their life in some meaningful way. And so if that is you, I invite you to join me in tearing a ribbon. And if it's not you, you don't have to. But if this is someone who played any kind of a role in your life, go ahead and take a ribbon. I'll just wait a moment as they go around. And you can repeat these words after me, which come from the book of Job. Adonai noten, Adonai lakach. Yehi Shem, Adonai mevorach. And that means God gives and God takes back. May the name of God's greatness be blessed. May this circle of birthing and dying that touches all of us so profoundly be blessed. You can go ahead and tear, and maybe put it over the right side of your chest, just as a way of letting the family have something special as well. They don't make men like that anymore, said Rabbi Ed Feldheim's daughter, Debbie, the other night as we sat down at the dining room table to tell stories about her dad. He was an incredible man. And what made him so incredible, I will leave to Benji to talk about in a few minutes. I want to share some of the Rabbi Ed Feldheim behind the music, behind the scenes, backstory for the person you may have come to know and love as a community leader here in Chicago, but whose story started much earlier outside of this city. He was the only child of David and Dorothy Feldheim, born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, December 3rd, 1939. He did not grow up in a devout Jewish practicing household, but his kind and loving parents attended Mount Sinai Synagogue, where he did every job a kid could do the whole way through childhood and adolescence under the watchful rabbinic guidance of Rabbi Sidney Greenberg, who I knew when I heard his name was famous for something. And when I looked it up, it turns out he wrote the book on women's ordination in the conservative movement. He was a feminist and believed in women's equality 50 years before it was a thing, 50 years before it was policy in the conservative movement. This was Rabbi Ed Feldheim's first and most impactful teacher and mentor. And it was a no-brainer that Ed would go into Jewish education himself, and then realizing that he had a knack for and a love for supporting people and uplifting and counseling people, that going into the rabbinate, following in his own rabbi's steps, would be the right move. He went to Gratz College in Philadelphia for undergrad and enrolled in the conservative movement's flagship school, the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York. And his parents, ever loving and supportive, adapted their home to be kosher as he worked his way through the seminary and grew deeper and more committed in his religious practice. After ordination in 1967, he went to Israel to help in the war effort of the nascent Jewish state. And when he moved back to the States, he got his first pulpit and assistantship in Bexley, Ohio, which is where a synagogue president by the name of Arthur Westerman took Ed under his wing and taught him the delicate art of dealing with people in a synagogue context, and grew to love and respect Ed's deep kindness and regard for people, so much so that he was okay with it when his daughter, Linda, and Ed fell in love, and Linda Westerman became Linda Feldheim in 1969. After a 2-year stint at a pulpit in Bridgeport, Connecticut, Ed and Linda moved to Greensboro, North Carolina, where they planted roots and stayed for 14 years, where he was kind of a kolbo, which is rabbi speak for the guy who did everything. Was rabbi and cantor, he led services, he read Torah, he gave sermons, he ran the education programs, and while doing all of that, he built a family. They built a family. Rachel and Debbie and Benji entered the picture. And Ed looked back and described these years as some of his best, where he worked the hardest, was heavily involved in synagogue activities, and saw a lot of his kids because the synagogue shared space with the Schechter School. But after 14 years, they wanted to change. They wanted to raise their kids in a place where they might be surrounded by nice Jewish families. And in 1986, Rabbi Feldheim and Linda moved to Morton Grove. and he took over at Northwest Suburban Jewish Congregation. He was there for 9 years for the B'nai Mitzvahs of all of his children, right? During shul, the kids would sit in the front row so that he could see them and they could see him. Debbie in 6th grade, Rachel in 3rd. Did I get that right? No. Rachel in 6th grade, Debbie in 3rd, Benji playing with G.I. Joes on the floor, shooting little bombs at the other people in the front row. And he would look down, the rabbi would look down from his pulpit as if to say, I see you and I love you, while he was being watched by 500 people, seeing and loving his family. And it was only clear much later, fairly recently, how much of a burden all that attention was for him as an introvert, and someone who was so humble, someone who did not go into the role for the attention. He managed never to make his children feel like they were an imposition on his big rabbi job. They knew how seriously he took his work, but they also felt how seriously he took them. He loved his work as a rabbi, teaching, counseling, visiting people in the hospital, writing eulogies, writing sermons. He also loved being a father and a husband, listening to his kids, asking their opinions, asking them to edit his sermons, teaching them how to lead the various parts of the service and synagogue life, laning, reading Torah, leading services, blowing shofar. Each kid had different things that he or she was interested in, and he supported each kid as they demonstrated curiosity and gently nudged them into their potential. His role as rabbi and father would converge around the kitchen table or the dining room table, where he would sit working, writing sermons, preparing eulogies. The kids would come around and he'd ask them how they're doing. He paid attention to them. He asked them about their lives. He was not too busy for them. He also went to bed kind of late. Linda would be up early, so around 9 p.m. until 3 a.m., he had a whole secret life with the kids. 7922 Wilson Terrace was where teenagers would want to hang out on Friday nights because everybody wanted to talk to Rabbi Ed. More to the point, everyone wanted Rabbi Ed to listen to them. He always seemed to be awake. He was always open. Years later, Debbie, from her midnight shift on the way home, would call him in the middle of the night. All the kids have memories of talking with him on the phone, coming or going from one intense place or another. He was always the one that you wanted to talk to. Before there was GPS on a smartphone, he had maps. He bought maps, and the kids would call him when they were lost, and he'd pull out the map and tell them where to go, right? What a metaphor. He heard you. He was focused on you. He made everyone feel that way. That was his gift. Even when he had dialysis needles in him, he heard, he was paying attention, he was listening, he cared. He was not too busy for you. So he stayed at Northwest Suburban for 9 years, and ultimately, with the support of many people in the congregation, left, and in the summer of 1995, created the place that would embody who he was as a person and as a rabbi, and would be the crowning culmination of his rabbinate, Beit Chaverim, the house of friendship. Because of the conservative movements, there's a non-compete clause that is written into the contracts of many rabbis that if you leave one shul, you can't start another one or be in another one, within a certain mile radius, because you'll take all the congregants. So they said, okay, go to Vernon Hills. And hence, Beit Chaverim was built in Vernon Hills, and it was a lot of work, but it was a happy time. It was all hands on deck. The congregants and his kids would set up the chairs and break them down after services. When they got a space, the congregation helped do everything in the space, the painting, the stucco. He never turned anyone away for lack of funds or for lack of education or Jewish background or commitment, all of which were fronts he fought on in previous synagogues. There might have been a moment where Linda might have said, Ed, are you sure? This is not such a great idea. Don't be ridiculous. And he would wave a loving hand as if to say, I love you, sweetie, and I'm right about this. This is how we bring Jews to God and to each other and to Torah. He'd call people who hadn't renewed their membership or maybe discover that they had no money this year. And he'd say, come to High Holidays for $5. And he knew what he was doing, and he had a strong internal compass for what was right and also for what was right for him as a leader and as a rabbi. He was the rabbi and the educator and the membership director. Once again, at Beit Haverim, he was kind of a kol bo. He did a lot of things, not everything, but this time it was on his own terms. And his terms were humility and gentleness and sensitivity. His terms were no BS, no games, no politics, no synagogue politics, and no geopolitics. You want geopolitics? You can get it on NBC, CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, NPR, WGN, WTTW. You can get it in a lot of places. You come to shul for something else. I'm here to support you, not to parse the news. And he was, for so many people, there for them. If someone called the shul to find out when might be the most visible primetime aliyah on the high holidays, he'd say, "There's no such thing." And he'd hang up the phone and say, "I'm not playing that game." Somebody called to find out what time Yizkor was going to be, because, of course, only come for that part. He would say, "When I start it." Because he didn't want to make services a transactional kind of experience. He believed that Torah and Judaism could and should be profound and personal and spiritual and meaningful. And as such, the Torah processions at Beit Haverim took half an hour, 45 minutes, because as they'd go around with the Torah, he'd stop and talk with everybody. And they wanted to be listened to by that kind and sensitive, attentive, loving person. It was just who he was, and it came through in everything he did. He led Beit Haverim for 17 years, till 2011, which is actually the year I moved to Chicago, which is interesting to sort of think about that intersection and crossing. I spoke with him a few months ago at that same dining room table, and he said to me, "It's hard being a retired rabbi. You don't know what to do with yourself. You become a rabbi because you love what you do for a living, and it's something you do with your whole life." And I know what he's talking about. It was hard for Ed not to have a congregation to serve, because serving people was who he was. He loved sports too. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't all about service. He loved sports. He loved fruit. He loved plants. He loved pets owned by his children, Snoop Dogg Cairo and Matzah Matzah Diamond. He never met a piece of fruit he didn't like. But most of all, he loved helping people, and he loved his family. The last year and a half of his life were hard. Though he was a pretty healthy guy throughout his first 79 years, recently time caught up with his body, and he needed more and more care and rest and to continue being there for his family, which became his reason for living. His kids, his grandkids, seeing Benji get married, seeing the twins get bar mitzvahed, these were goals to stay alive for. There will surely be many more simchas that he will be present at in spirit. But about a week and a half ago, it became clear that it was getting too hard. Much too hard. The dialysis routine that he had endured with relatively little complaining and great company from Teak. He was done. He was done. And Linda said, "No, you've got to go on." But he waved a knowing hand as if to say, "I love you, sweetie, but I'm right about this." His inner compass, as usual, guided him where he needed to go. He lived on terms of love and gentleness and care, and he left this world on those same terms, applying them maybe for the first time to himself. Harav Yehuda Hirsch ben Baruch Yaakov V'Devora, Rabbi Ed Feldheim, your memory will be a blessing to your family, to everyone you ever offered a sermon for, did a eulogy for a family member, or stood next to under the chuppah or at a bris. Everyone you ever touched with your wisdom, your listening, your teaching, your love is better for having known you. I ask us to open up our little service guides here, and we'll turn to Psalm 23. I'll sing it in Hebrew, and then we can read it together in English. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Rui lo echsar. Binotesh yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yanahaleini. Nafshi shovev yancheni b'magle tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begetz al mavet, lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorerai. Dishanta b'shemen roshi, kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed, yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. V'shavti b'veit Adonai, le'orech yamim. Join me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of the righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I want to invite up Benji Feldheim, his youngest, his only son.
Thank you all for coming and joining through the live stream. If you're here or watching today, excuse me. If you're here or watching today, then you probably had the benefit of a conversation with him. A talk with my dad of any length of time was a unique experience, even with the countless number of conversations we have throughout our lives. It's because he really listened to you. He wasn't just waiting for his turn to talk or waiting for a cue to react. He heard every word. He absorbed every inflection. And he loved you. And if you were in pain or struggling in any way, he felt your pain and your struggle, and he met you there. He felt for you so strongly that he would meet you in your space of pain and struggle so he could best find a way to help you. That's how much he cared, and that was his real gift to us all. His lifelong mission was to meaningfully help anyone who crossed his path. It's because he was the most genuine empath I've ever known. Dad would share this incredible gift with anyone: family, congregants, acquaintances, lifelong friends, and perfect strangers he came across that he could just sense needed some help, needed some love. It's like he had a radar for it. He cared for everybody in a pure and genuine and, again, meaningful way. I'm realizing you'll hear that word a few times. He never wanted anything in return. His reason for giving was simply just to ease the suffering, because he just found earlier in life that he could, and so he did. He masterfully balanced caring and compassion with brightness, humor, and sharp wit, even in his final days. He loved Mel Brooks, and he shared Mel's gift for finding laughter even in the darkest of times. And he appreciated a good dirty joke, but never anything mean. He loved the meticulous and elegant tones of singers like Nat King Cole and Billy Eckstine, as they reflected his own rich, distinctive baritone that he could still share with us as recently as this past Passover. He loved the peace and serenity of the beach, always taking delight when pelicans would fly by, and he would say, "Look, the boys are back." He loved to walk during the rare and perfect 70-degree and sunny weather. Plants and animals brought him great joy as well. At this time of year, he would be lovingly sharing flavorful tomatoes that he grew himself from his garden. The only time that he was staunchly critical was about falafel. Even his beloved Pita Inn, just around the corner from here, eventually couldn't reach his lofty standards. But Dad would never speak in that irritating tone of people who go on one single trip to another country and come back talking like they are the authority of all things in that country. However, his falafel standards were rooted in his time living in Israel. In 1967, he was in Jerusalem during the Six-Day War. He ran a shelter for people who were displaced when their homes were damaged or destroyed. I remember him telling me about driving through the streets at night in a car with the headlights painted black so the bombing planes overhead couldn't see him. He would pick up supplies to take back to the shelter and drive through a combat zone to help others. In 1970, he staffed a youth trip to Israel with my mom. One participant was stricken with polio and paralyzed from the waist down, but very physically strong in his upper body. At the Mitzada hike, he tried as best as he could, but the climb was just too much for him. There were no easy paths to take back then like there are now. So Dad put him on his back and literally carried him the rest of the way up Mitzada to see the sunrise. If these stories are new to you, it's because he would never brag about himself. He would never put himself above others. Judaism to him was a platform to help people. He followed halacha himself, but he never laid guilt on Jews who chose not to, including his own children. He developed meaningful interfaith services and strong relationships with churches while in Greensboro, North Carolina, in Morton Grove, and in Vernon Hills. In North Carolina, the local park district wanted to throw a block party right in front of the synagogue on Saturday morning. He calmly said to them, "How about we do the same thing on Sunday in front of the church?" They got his message. Whenever I got angry about something trivial and wanted some over-the-top justice, he would smile and say, "Just leave a little bit to God." I like to think that he was suggesting karma. It's one way that he was very progressive throughout his life, even though he wouldn't say it. He believed in real equality for all people, no matter their religion or sect or race, their nationality, their orientation, their gender, or any other way people identify. Dad always knew that synagogues could do more for all people, so he started Congregation Beit Chaverim, a true house of friends. His vision did not have a board or a formal governing body. Too many times in the past, synagogue officers would prevent him from allowing people into the synagogue if they couldn't pay dues. He proved that you didn't need those formalities and the bureaucracy. He proved that it could be sustainable to actually give people the respite that they were so dearly looking for. The door for him was always open. When we purchased a modest building, congregants painted the walls themselves. When someone had an idea for an event, people volunteered to take on the tasks. For 17 years, his longest tenure at any synagogue, he proved that the vision could be real, that he and others who shared in this vision of a synagogue built upon community service and support could always find a way. I can close my eyes and see him at our kitchen table, putting his soul into the many eulogies and wedding and bar mitzvah and bar and bat mitzvah talks he gave over the years. He showed me that when you tell other people stories, you do it with the utmost care and respect and thoughtfulness. No matter how many years have passed since people have seen him or attended one of his services, they all say the same thing. We still think of him as our rabbi. And my family received the greatest gift of all from him. We spent decades benefiting from his kindness at all times, a gift beyond any measurable value. My sisters and I all recall many nights where we called him not for answers or solutions to the problems that we were facing that kept us up so late, but just to hear his soothing voice and to experience the warmth of his listening. He never minded that we were likely interrupting his writing sessions. He was just always there for us. He showed his 5 grandchildren the same unconditional love, and it was such a joy to see them get to know him. Thankfully, towards the end, he found a kindred spirit in his caretaker, Johnny Teaksana, who showed him the same warmth and patience that Dad showed us all. This kind and gentle man didn't just care for Dad, but befriended him, commiserating with him about the Chicago Cubs and Bulls and Bears, telling stories and finding ways to laugh in between the increasing health challenges that came. He gave the gift back to Dad, which no doubt extended his life with quality during his hardest final months. And yet, Dad didn't quite show enough of this kindness to himself. Being a rabbi, always having eyes on his every move and word, it was exhausting for him. He was a true introvert, meaning being on display as he was so often in his work, it just drained him of energy. But he did it every day. He never once quit. He never once allowed himself that space. You see, he originally set out to become an educator, but he wanted to provide more, for his family. And he had a natural knack for counseling people. He also had that rich baritone voice and could chant so beautifully. So he pushed through his own pain for 42 years as a professional rabbi. And yet, even in retirement, he still took upon counseling others. So why share this now? Why risk making the sad time more painful, hearing about what he went through? I share this because as I look around and I see so many people that have benefited from his care and his love, I really think you should know just how deeply of himself he gave to all of us, all through his life. But also, if you want to keep him with you, then give a little more of yourself to the people around you. And please know, I say this as much for me as all of you. Just keep it simple. Hold a door open. Pick up something if it falls. If you just have a sense that someone needs just a little bit of help, or even just a kind word, or even a hi, or how you doing, just ask. Just call. Do this, even if your plate's full, even if you're feeling a little overwhelmed. It might just relieve a little bit of your attention too. Small showings of kindness like that really go a long way. He showed us that over and over again. And in that way, if we do that, we all can have the same effect on others that he had on us. But also, for his sake and for yours, take it one other step. Show that same kindness to yourselves. Treat yourself the way he would treat you and everyone else. It's not easy. You'd think it would be, but it's not. Just imagine him asking you, or actually imagine him just saying, what would he say to you? How would he counsel you? Try to just picture him saying that, and through that, show yourself that love too. May we all remember him by extending more kindness to those around us without any desire for recognition or reward. And may we also show that same love to ourselves. May his memory be a blessing and an inspiration for treating all of humanity better. Amen.
I received a condolence call today from one of did he ever go by Rabbi Ed, or was he Rabbi Feldheim? What do people call him? He was Rabbi Feldheim. Okay, one of Rabbi Feldheim's colleagues, longtime colleagues here in Chicago, who called me to say he couldn't be here in person, but that he read the tribute you wrote Benji in the paper, and he was like, who wrote that incredible tribute in the paper? Did you write that, Rabbi? I was like, no, I did not. That is his journalist son. He said, my God, it was beautiful. I shared it with people. And he wanted me to know, he wanted me to share with all of you that Rabbi Feldheim was a longtime part of the Chicago Board of Rabbis, and that in 1996 he went with 2 other Chicago rabbis back to JTS, to the Jewish Theological Seminary, to receive an honorary doctorate, which was very meaningful to him. And so, hello, Rabbi Brief, if you're watching online. We are now in the Jewish calendar reading through the book of Deuteronomy. We're coming to the end of the Torah as we move also toward high holidays. And it is also kind of a tough tightrope walk that rabbis do during this season between preparing for the high holidays on the one hand, and this is a tightrope walk that Rabbi Feldheim knew well, because you're preparing for high holidays over here, which is a big deal, but Shabbat, week to week to week to week, is also a big deal, and you're reading the Torah week after week, even as your head is in the high holiday game. So this week, we read from Parshat Re'eh, which means see, look, see. Moses, knowing that he could only take the Israelites so far, tries to impart every last lesson to the Israelites in these last parshiot in the Torah. This week he says, see, God says, I place before you blessing and curse. If you do my mitzvot, you will have blessing. Curses if you don't. And I read Moses as kind of like a parent finally coming to terms with the visceral knowledge that you can't walk with your children the whole way. Eventually, they will go on without you. But whereas Moses tries to say a whole lot at the end, as if to make up for his behavior on the journey, he had some real explosions. He was not always the best leader. Whereas Moses sort of has this whole speech he gives at the end of his life as if to make up for some of the behavior of his life. Rabbi Ed Feldheim was his message. He didn't give any grand sermons at the end to try to make up for a life he might have lived differently. He lived exactly the life with the kindness and the attentiveness and the sensitivity and the challenges that brought, that he intended for 82 years. He didn't need to make some big speech. He was the Torah that he taught. He was kindness and compassion. He was a true mensch. He was non-judgmental, always, of everyone, including when his kids would call and say, like, but Dad, have you tried pepperoni pizza? It's so good. And he'd say, I'm happy for you, but no, I'm okay, right? He was so sensitive when reading the Harry Potter books that he couldn't read the parts about the kids at whatever that school is. What's the school? Thank you, Hogwarts, being mean to Dumbledore, because it was just too painful for his sensitive heart. He lived the rigorousness of Jewish tradition, but unlike many people in his generation, and certainly in the conservative movement at that time, he had a moral compass that transcended meticulous observance and stringencies. He had an innate sense of human decency. He was flexible and welcoming. He was friendly and relatable and available for anybody at any time. He was warm-hearted and funny and sweet and thoughtful and considerate and, like Moses, exceedingly humble. They don't make men like that anymore. We can confidently say about Rabbi Ed Feldheim, Seitcha l'shalom, go in peace. I want to invite us to stand for El Malei Rachamim, which is a prayer for his spirit to take him safely to his next and final resting place. El male rachamim, shochen bameromim. המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהרים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים. את נשמת הרב יהודה הרש בן ברוך יעקב ודבורה, שהלך לעולמו. בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו. וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. O God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of your presence among the holy and the pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, to the soul of Rabbi Ed Feldheim, who has gone unto eternity. Lord of mercy, bring him under the cover of your wings and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May God be your eternal possession, and may your repose be peace. And we can all say, Amen. And before we sit, we're going to close with a song that he loved, that was made popular and beloved in Beit Chaverim. It's a prayer for peace. This prayer is found in the evening service at the very end of the Amidah. It is said standing. And I know he's singing in his baritone right along with us, wherever he is. So join me if you know this tune. It's on the inside of your prayer handout. Shalom Rav al Yisroel Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisroel Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki ata hu melech adon lechol hashalom. Ki ata hu melech adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav al Yisroel Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisroel Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov beinecha levarech et Amcha Yisroel bechol ed uvachol shah bishlomecha. Shalom Rav al Yisroel Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisroel Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam.
Ladies and gentlemen, the interment service will continue at Memorial Park Cemetery located at 9900 Grosse Pointe Road here in Skokie. The procession will be forming in our parking lot. Please obtain an orange safety funeral sticker to place on the right-hand side of your windshield. Have your bright lights and hazard lights on at all times. For additional measures of safety, we'll have a car in the back of the procession to hopefully keep other cars from entering the procession. And for your own personal safety, I strongly recommend using your horn liberally as you're going through the intersections And please do not speak or text on your cellular phone while driving to a cemetery. Due to COVID, the Shiva will be private, and memorial contributions to Mishkan Chicago would be appreciated. For those of you who are joining us online, that information is on our website. At this time, I invite everyone to please rise and stand in place as the pallbearers come forward, and as anyone who has served with the rabbi, be it if you're a clergy or in the professional Jewish world, please come forward to serve as an honorary pallbearer. And this concludes the live stream portion. You may return to your car.